I mean, isn't the reason they can't get a job that they don't have
Couldn't that youth guarantee of guaranteeing them, an investment, couldn't that almost make them want to leave school early?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I think look, a lot of young people go through to year 13, so they're 17 or 18, and they head off to, university or Polytech or whatever it might be. But, I mean, the thing I think we've got to recognise is why are people drifting out of school much earlier? And it's because it's not relevant. I mean, that's the problem with Helen Clark's scheme. She's fundamentally really saying, I want you to stay at school till you're 18. The problem is there's 31,000 kids that are truant from school every week in New Zealand, and that's when the leaving age is 16. I mean, why are they going to stay, if they're not turning up when they're 14, why are they going to turn up all of a sudden because they're 17? It's not going to happen. The only way you're going to make it happen is for them to think it's interesting. So last year we announced trades in schools. So like the Australians have these apprenticeship academies. I personally reckon there's plenty of 14-year-old boys who don't give a toss about art history, but we'd be more than happy to rip an engine apart. Well, let's get them ripping an engine apart.
There's plenty of 14-year-old artists who can give a toss about art history.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, finally on youth,
but they're very talented though.
In your first State of the Nation speech, you spoke about the opportunity you had for a good education. True. Kids today end up with an average student debt of $28,000 to get the same education as you did. Any plans to go back to tertiary education? Free tertiary education?
I don't know if it would go back to free.
Why
not? Sheer cost of it, I guess, is about
$350 million a year.
Yeah, I guess what would you do with the $9 billion of student loans? Write them off, I suppose.
I mean, come on.
There's sort of equity issues.
Let's look at you. Here you are, the perfect example of a man who was born into a state house, made good, got his education, was able to go to university because it was free, got to the place where you are, and now you might be our Prime Minister. And yet the next generation of John Keys have to pay $28,000 worth of student loans if they can get a student loan in the first place. Yeah,
look, there's a number of different parts of that, right? I mean, firstly, probably the tertiary education has widened out substantially to where it was. So a lot of those student loans aren't necessarily related to tertiary qualifications. They're actually around, well, they're tertiary but not university per se. There might be a whole lot of other sort of areas.
But it's estimated that around $350 million is all we would need to provide free tertiary education.
Yeah.
Now, surely with the massive surpluses that you keep going on about and the huge desire that we have for tax cuts, and you can afford these tax cuts because of these huge surpluses, you could give every kid in this country back to having tertiary free education.
I guess what I'd say to you is, look, I mean, we are looking at things like student allowances and all those sorts of things. We've made it clear we're going to keep loans at 0%, and we've made it clear that if you repay early, and some will, they'll get a 10% discount on that.
But you didn't have to do it.
I know.
And look at where you are.
Yeah, but the issue...
And you're worried about the brain drain, you're worried about upskilling our people, and you're worried about all of these sorts of things, and yet, that to me seems one of the most basic things that you could do.
And there are some areas where we could do that, right? I mean, we've argued that we want to bond doctors, or we might do certain things with teachers and write off their student loan, which is effectively the same thing. I mean, wholesale, could we do it? I don't know, we could look at it, but I mean, one thing I'd say to you is, and this is what I say to young people when I go out to all the schools all the time, is look, if you've got a chance, go to university. Don't worry about the student loan. That is the least of your problems, but do two things. Finish the degree.
It's not the least of their problems once they graduate. I know them.
Yeah.
They're walking around with, $28,000, $40,000, $60,000 debts around their neck. While you were in your first year of work, earning your first amount of cash, they're hard slog paying back their debt to be an educated part of New Zealand society.
Yeah, I mean, but you've got to look at it and say, okay, what's driving those costs? So, what's the average course fee at university? About $4,000 a year, that sort of number, probably. I've looked recently, but I guess it's that sort of number. So a lot of what's driving their debt is because they're living away from home, right? Now, so, I mean, had I been at university and lived away from home, I mean, I had the luxury of being able to live at home, and I was in Christchurch and I could go to Canterbury, but the bottom line is I would have racked up debt then too. I mean, even back in my day, it was only the fees that were paid. So
do that?
Yeah, well, that's a possibility, I suppose. I'm just saying, I understand where you're coming from, and I'm not disagreeing with you that we want people to go and we want people to be able to not be racked down with debts. I mean, one of the reasons I didn't like 0% loans, and I was open about it in the campaign in 2005, was I was really worried that people would take down more debt than, and that actually the evidence shows they have, and they're going to have it for longer.
But don't you think part of the reason people are fleeing to Australia is to escape it?
Partly, yeah. Well, partly because
you could solve both of your problems at the same
partly
time.
What the problem is, I think, is they get this debt. When they're at university, it doesn't seem that much. They say, okay, I owe 30 grand, well, I'm going to start working, I'll pay it off. As soon as they come out, there's lots of other expenses that they hadn't kind of thought about. They want to move out, whatever, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever it might be, move in. And then the problem is that debt hangs around, and at the point at which their income is higher,
just 2 minutes
then
ago,
they go,
you said you encourage kids to not worry about the debt, to go to university, the debt won't matter. And now you're here saying to me that the debt builds up and there's a whole lot more expensive and they have to run to Australia.
No, well, I'll tell you why I don't think it matters if they should get debt. And the answer for that is getting the qualification. All the academic evidence shows you, if you're tertiary qualified and you complete your degree, your average income earning stream is much higher. So that's what I say to you. What I say to young kids is, look, get the qualification and make sure you go there and complete it.
I'm just saying I think you should think about that. You want people to not leave Australia, you want to increase our average national income. Surely, free tertiary education is a way to achieve both of those things in some part. Let's move on.
Okay.
Your predecessor, Don Brash, made National extremely popular with his Maoris get everything and us poor white folks get nothing speech. You know, he became talkback king. You know, everybody leapt up and arms and said, right, the Maoris do get everything. Look at how well they're doing. But you haven't done that. You've come, as Chris Trotter points out, you've told the religious right you have little interest in their influence on the National Party. You seem to be a much broader, much more centrist politician. We see you at the Big Gay Out. We see you at Waitangi. All those sort of things. Recently, however, you sound like you're wavering on Sue Bradford's repeal of Section 59.
No, I'm not.
You're not?
No. Look, again, you know, you've got to go back and look at I mean, that was an interpretation that the Sunday Star Times editorial wanted to make, and in fact, if you read the story that Ruth Logerson wrote on the front page, she exactly summarised my position. I've always said, I said the day we signed the thing, which is, look, we don't like this legislation overly, but we do want to try and do something in New Zealand about reducing smacking. But I've always said, I think the law will work, I think the police will administer it correctly, but if a good parent or good parents, there's evidence to prove that good parents are criminalised for lightly smacking their children, we'll do something about it, and that means changing the law.
But it doesn't mean repealing it.
Well, that's right. And I haven't seen evidence.
280,000 New Zealanders have signed a petition saying that they want.
Yeah, and a lot of them signed it well before we actually reached the compromise. I mean, if you go and have a look at, there's been 3 or 4 cases that have been pushed by Bob McCroskey and others about smacking of children.
What are your thoughts on Bob McCroskey?
Well, you know, look, whatever. Everyone's entitled to put their own position forward. But I'm saying, if you go and look at those 4 cases, have you ever seen me come out there and try and make cheap politics and say, yeah, see, there's a reason why it should be looked at? Never. I've always said, you know, that's been the consistent position, and I think that's the right position.
That position. I think it is. We shouldn't be hitting our kids.
And if the laws are nonsense and someone lightly slaps a child and as a human reaction and they get hauled off and become a criminal, that's wrong. But outside that, we're not changing the law.
There's new blood within National. New MPs who are deeply uncomfortable with Don Brash's stance on Māori. You can be counted amongst them, but National still has a front bench that looks like it's somewhere in the 90s. How are you going to get that new blood pumping so that the electorate doesn't feel like we're just going back down the old roads of privatisation?
Yeah, well, firstly, we're not going back down the old roads of privatisation.
Really? Promise?
Yeah, well, look,
CVNZ, you're going to privatise it?
No.
Why not?
Well, we don't need to. I mean, just
you should sell TV2. Anyway.
If you go back to when I was the finance spokesman, I mean, I hate to say, look, hark back, but you know, we had a very timid response on privatisation. And the reason was, if you go back and look at why we sold assets, there were 2 really good reasons. We were broke as a country, well, we're not now. And 2, they made no money, they do now.
What about part privatisation?
I've made it clear I'm not so opposed to that. We had that in the solid energy position back in 2005. I don't know what will happen in 2008. I don't think that's going to be the big driver to actually making our economy much stronger.
So you think things like Kiwibank, the education system, the prison system, all of those sorts of things will stay in public hands?
Oh, yeah. I mean, but what I'm not opposed to is I think the current government has a blind ideology to never allowing the private sector to be involved. So you take prisons. Auckland Remand Prison was run by a private contract. It had fantastic results. Better rehabilitation, prisoners were actually happier, better safety records, lower number of people were escaping, the whole 9 yards. Why did Labor get rid of it? Because they were ideologically opposed. That, I think, is wrong. I can't see any reason why they wouldn't be allowed to do that. But are the vast bulk of prisons going to be run by the public service? Yes. That's the way it'll be. Same as health. Will the vast bulk be run by the public health service? Yes. But is there any reason why...
So are you suggesting there that a minority of them will be run by private?
Well, I'm just saying, why wouldn't you allow Auckland Hospital or Auckland DHB to negotiate to buy a long-term contract for some capacity with Mercy Hospital?